Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. This podcast is about endometriosis, how to live with it, how to treat it, and how to get laws passed in Connecticut to continue to do research in our state. Over 160 million women are affected worldwide. In the United States, 10 million. And in Connecticut, 1 in 10 women has endometriosis. With surgeries costing somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000, maybe even more, it can be a huge barrier to get treated. That's where Connecticut Paid Leave can come in. Endometriosis is a chronic condition with no cure, and Connecticut Paid Leave can help with up to 12 weeks of income replacement to take care of your own serious health condition or that of a loved one as a caregiver. And it can be taken in a block or intermittently or at a reduced schedule from work. You must have incapacitation and continued care with a healthcare professional, and we also cover mental health as long as your healthcare provider deems it a serious health condition. I have some great guests. Representative Jillian Gilchrest, who was elected to represent the 18th District in West Hartford. She serves as the House Chair of the Human Services Committee and member of the Appropriations, Public Health, and Judiciary Committees. She's co-chair of the Reproductive Rights Caucus. Jillian chairs MAPOC, the Medical Assistance Program Oversight Committee, the Trafficking in Persons Council, and the Endometriosis Working Group. And last but not least, Jillian is a huge advocate for Connecticut paid leave and helped to get paid leave passed into law. Welcome to the podcast, Jillian. You are busy.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we have Kaylee Mitchell. She is an endometriosis advocate, a support group founder, and part of the Endometriosis Working Group with Jillian. Kaylee is also a patient with personal experience having endometriosis. And welcome to the podcast, Kaylee.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, Kaylee, let's start with you, Jillian, and you can jump in as well. Can you tell me what endometriosis is?
Sure. So endometriosis is a chronic disease characterized by abnormal lesions, cysts or nodules on organs and structures throughout the body. These they're inflammatory growths. They can cause pain, adhesions, fibrosis, scar tissue, and organ dysfunction. It can range from being superficial to deeply infiltrating. It can typically be found anywhere in the body. And they're superficial, and then there's deeply infiltrating. So usually on the colon, it's typically deeply infiltrating. It can be in the pelvic region, the diaphragm, the colon, the bladder, and the list goes on.
Wow. Tell me about your personal experience with endometriosis, like your timeline. It took you a long time to get a diagnosis.
It did. So I started having symptoms when I was around 21. I did not receive a diagnosis until I was 26. So it took me 6 years, and the average time to get diagnosed is between 6 to 10 years.
Why so long?
That's a very good question. So in my experience, I was diagnosed with IBS because my symptoms presented primarily as GI issues starting out. And I think my healthcare providers couldn't piece together, my period symptoms from my GI symptoms. In the big picture, it was all related. Once I started doing my own research and talking to others, like in the support group and online, I figured it out. Yeah.
Like, how do you find out? You have to have surgery to find out if you have endometriosis, which is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. So I had a laparoscopy in 2016. They found endometriosis, went to pathology, it was confirmed, and that's how I was diagnosed.
Who finally figured it out for you?
Yeah. During that span, I probably have seen 20 different healthcare providers.
Wow.
At least. Yeah. And the first time I heard the word endometriosis actually came from a gastroenterologist. He said, "Have you heard of endometriosis?" And I said, "Endo what?" Like, no idea. So he said, "You might want to see your OBGYN." And that's where I started. I went to my OBGYN Based on my symptoms, she actually doubted that I did have endometriosis, but agreed, since I was so desperate, agreed to do the surgery. And in fact, I did have it. And that was my first step on my journey. Mm-hmm.
How many surgeries have you had?
I have had, for endometriosis, I've had 3.
How can you treat endometriosis once you get a diagnosis?
So the gold standard of treatment is excision. It's done laparoscopically. There's a lot of barriers to get proper treatment. The first line of treatment typically, in my case, we tried various birth controls. I want to say I was on, over the years, probably 8 different types of birth control to try to figure it out. And then we moved on to Lupron and Orilissa, which they're also medications that people think can treat the disease. But in my case, they just masked my symptoms. My disease still progressed. And at the end of the day, I was back to where I started after all these treatments.
Wow. So living with endometriosis, from a scale of 1 to 10, is your pain where on that scale, or does it differ every day?
100.
Wow. Seriously.
There came a point in my life where I started having symptoms when I was 21. I was still trying to finish school at that time, and I did not graduate from college for that reason. I had to drop out. I started working, and even that was very, very difficult. I was very fortunate to have a boss who was understanding. I would miss at least a week of work a month, and then it progressed to 2 weeks a month. And then that's when I made the decision to leave my position, because I couldn't deal with, I felt guilty and shameful, you know what I mean, for missing work that I was supposed to be doing. So I left my job and I created my own job. I pretty much started working from home.
What kind of job are you doing from home?
So I make hula hoops. I started as a fitness instructor, and that was very difficult as well, but I did it when I could. And then I started making and selling hula hoops on Etsy. And then I started teaching hula hoops as well when I could. So I was able to create a schedule that worked for me, where if I had pain, I wouldn't schedule classes then.
Yeah.
And I would focus on creating a product that I could sell online.
That's fabulous. That's really amazing.
Thank you.
So were there support groups back then that would help you, or were there resources that you could reach out to?
The first resource I found was a group on Facebook called Nancy's Nook, and it's still in existence. It's one of the more well-known support groups. And meanwhile, this is when I was 26. So this was 2016. That was one of the only ones that I found.
Wow. And do you find that when you talk to other patients that they have difficulty staying at work because of this disease?
Yes, it's a huge barrier to working, to making a living. You mentioned mental health before. That comes into play.
Yeah. Did you see a therapist?
I just started seeing a therapist. When was it? Last year.
Mm-hmm. I would think that it would be hard for having a diagnosis like this. And when you find out there's really no cure for it, you can do things to help alleviate the pain, but it never really leaves.
Right. And I'm a strong proponent of seeking out a therapist that, can work with you and understands what you're going through.
Because I would imagine it would also affect relationships.
It does. I was lucky. I've been in a relationship for about 13 years now. And he's very supportive, but it came to a point when, every day I was like, oh, I'm in pain. And then I just stopped saying it. And I kind of shut down, internalized everything. And that's where I ended up. Yep.
So how did you get involved with Jillian and the endometriosis working group?
I believe I was just searching online one day and I came across it and I was like, this is amazing. I reached out and I joined the group.
And Jillian, what were your reasons for focusing on endometriosis? Is there a personal connection for you?
So I had a colleague reach out who does work in the homelessness space here in Connecticut. And she said, based on the issues you work on, I think you'd want to know about this disease, endometriosis. And we met for coffee and she explained her story, which I have now unfortunately realized is the story of many women, of being made to feel crazy most of her life and told what she was experiencing is normal, even though it wasn't. She was told at certain points she was making it up, that it was in her head. She lost a relationship over it. She experienced infertility. And I left that coffee meeting and went home and started Googling and was horrified. And because of my background, and I'm a feminist, I was just drawn to the issue because to me, it is just a legacy of us not researching diseases that impact women, of not believing women when they share the experience they're having, and to see what a major impact it's having on people's lives. I knew I had to do something, and so formed the endometriosis working group.
And take me through that timeline of the working group through today. What was your end goal when you started the working group?
Ironically, I thought we'd meet for a year. And then once I started meeting with folks and unpacking the disease that is endometriosis and how it impacts folks' lives and how much work there is to do. I mean, from, what Kaylee was just sharing again about missing work, there's a whole angle, or the fact that there still is no cure, or the fact that the diagnosis, if you want the official diagnosis, you have to get surgery, insurance coverage, the mental health piece, the education, because medical providers are not educated on this on a whole, and young people, and individuals are not educated. So once, we unpacked, wow, how big of an issue it is, decided that the working group would be ongoing. And it's taken me in directions I never thought. We've actually gotten national recognition. Other states are looking to do the same thing so that they can elevate the issue of endometriosis. And now actually very good news. I think it was just a week or so ago, the White House announced that Dr. Jill Biden will be pushing for more research dollars for women's health. And they cited endometriosis, which I think is a huge win because it really wasn't discussed too much. And so we're getting there, but there's just still a lot of work to be done. A big piece of the working group is having the voices like Kaylee's. And so I would turn that back and say, look what they've done.
Yeah,
because
it's true.
The role I get to be in is like, all right, teach me, and then I'll use my platform to try and push change.
Well, that's cool. Was that your strategy? Because you seemed really kind of methodical about getting this working group together. It was like, and right from the beginning, because I watched like your first meeting, and there was a lot of people in that meeting.
Yeah, my background. So I am a social worker by training, always in policy. And before coming to the legislature, I was an advocate. And so I know how to build a coalition and do advocacy work. And so that's what I try to bring to this role. It's like, okay, I do know what it takes to get attention on an issue. So for this one in particular, it's been tremendous to see the various women who've come to the table to share their experiences. Some of my colleagues, 50s, in their 60s, those women are saying like, thank you. We never were able to talk about this. And people share like their grandmother, their mother, it's been something that has gone on in families for so long, and there was never an opportunity to talk about it.
Tell me about House Bill 6672. It's an act concerning endometriosis. What does it do for women in Connecticut?
So what's fantastic about this legislation is, and we got the funding behind it, we created a biorepository. We are the first state to do this. And so UConn Health has partnered with Jackson Laboratory here in the state, and they will be doing a few things, but they will be collecting tissue samples from individuals who have endometriosis. And we want tissue samples from a diversity of folks with endometriosis because women's health is often ignored, but then when we look at that, Black women's health is even ignored more. And so we want to ensure that as we're moving forward with this work, we're addressing the needs of all individuals who experience endometriosis. Additionally, and so the goal is once they have these samples, they're going to be able to do studies to develop treatments and to develop diagnostic tools. And furthermore, they are going to be doing education amongst medical providers here in the state and ideally across the country so that endometriosis does become something that's more known with healthcare providers so that what Kaylee explained doesn't have to keep happening.
Right.
You don't have to go to a number of medical providers before one says, hey, have you ever heard of endometriosis?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Is there a network of doctors that specialize in endometriosis, or is that what you're working on? Push to get physicians more training to recognize symptoms. 5 to 10 years is horrific.
There is a network, and in other countries, like Australia is often cited, it is more, discussed and known. We do have specialists here in the country, but not enough. Really, it is these specialists. And so the everyday OBGYN, or to Kaylee's point, a lot of folks with endometriosis will show up because of gastro issues. Well, they should be trained on it so that they know. What shocks me is 50% of infertility can be attributed to endometriosis.
Wow.
That's another provider type. So I've heard tons of stories of women going through multiple infertility treatments only to be told, like after 3 or 4 treatments, oh, you have endometriosis. Well, maybe that should have been found out first. So, it's how do we get this disease on the radar of all healthcare providers?
And that's interesting because I was talking to Kaylee earlier, with cervical cancer, there's the pap smear. Is there research being done that there can be a less invasive way to find out you have endometriosis and not have to have surgery?
That work is being done. Mm-hmm. Right now, there's and I'm sure they're not the only one. There's folks who come to me, they're trying to do a blood test that would be able, but that again links to there hasn't been enough federal dollars for research. There's also this thinking, unfortunately, in a capitalist society, in the end, will it make money if they develop, if there's still no treatment, why would someone... Okay, great. You have the diagnosis, but there isn't the treatment. So it's kind of like the chicken and the egg.
Yeah,
you
right.
have to be working on both at the same time. And then also insurance, will insurance cover? So those are those pieces where I'm saying we have so much work to do because you have to be working on all these different pieces to keep moving the needle.
What about Black and Brown or the LGBTQ plus communities?
With Black and Brown women, there's quite a bit of research on the fact that Black women's pain is ignored even more than what Kaylee's described, like white women's pain, that there's many medical providers who think Black women have a higher tolerance of pain. And so they will just be discarded, or they have internalized and learned not to express what they're experiencing. We also see in that lack of insurance coverage piece, you mentioned at the start, $20,000 to $30,000 or more for a surgery. There's a lot of Black and Brown women who are unable to get the surgery they need. And then with the LGBTQ community, we're really trying to be purposeful in the language we use. And that's why you'll hear me say individuals experiencing endometriosis, because anyone with a uterus can experience it. And we've actually also been discussing as a working group that there has been endometriosis found in men. Again, such an unknown disease still that they're trying to figure out why that's so. But we had a great presentation on those in the LGBTQ community trying to access OBGYN healthcare in general. Yeah. And so we learned, there's lots of barriers. If you don't identify as a woman, but you have female parts, that can be a very uncomfortable appointment. And so trying to figure out how we work with healthcare providers to make it more of a safe space for folks.
The health disparities are really endless, but let's hope that closes a little bit. Can you tell me about family history? Do your chances go up getting endometriosis if your mom has it or your sister?
So interesting, again, the lack of research doesn't directly say that there is a genetic connection, but in the conversations we have, and there is some research being done, it does appear that it is genetic. And when folks are sharing their experiences, often, again, at this point in our history, it seems like, oh, yeah, my mom went through those same things, or someone like Kaylee. I'm sorry, I keep using, but you're here, like Kaylee gets diagnosed.
It's okay.
Their mom, like Kaylee's mom might say like, oh, your grandmother, was unable to get off the couch for a week. Like it then kind of comes out like this was this thing that was being experienced, but they were never diagnosed and there was no word for it. So we do believe there is a genetic connection.
My sister-in-law had it, and she had to have a full hysterectomy. And I thought when you have that, it gets rid of it. But Kaylee, you told me that's not the case.
Yeah, that's one of the larger myths surrounding the disease, that if you do get a hysterectomy, it will, I don't want to say cure, but yes, it will cure the disease. That's not true. There is a related disease called adenomyosis, which if you do have that, a hysterectomy is a cure. But for endometriosis, it is not.
It is not. And so there's nothing you can do to get rid of it. So even if you had a full hysterectomy, you could still have the symptoms of endometriosis.
Yeah, I mean, it can be found in various parts of the body,
Right.
like bowel, bladder, diaphragm, lungs, nerves. So if you think about it, just taking the uterus and ovaries out,
It's
if
not
it's on
gonna-
your bowel or your bladder, it's not going to help you.
It's frightening how invasive it can be. More research, I guess. Get on to Jackson Labs. How did you find those people who are in the research world, Jillian?
Great question. So in my planning stage for the working group, I started reaching out to the various major health entities in the state, and one of those folks had the connection at UConn Health that there was a doctor who was focused in this and would like to participate. And then interestingly, after our first meeting, there was a newspaper article on the working group, and the doctor at Jackson Laboratory who was doing research on this, her colleague went to her. She has since told me the story and said, hey, look what's happening. You should connect with them. And so she reached out, and she now has been a major part of our working group going forward.
Tell me how Connecticut paid leave fits into this conversation. How does it help women suffering from this or caregivers?
So we were having a meeting recently, and we're having the conversation about, again, very much what Kaylee was sharing. And oh my God, Kaylee, to have to leave school, right? And then, when you were sharing, thank goodness I had an understanding employer, but you still, the guilt and shame of having to miss work, because again, with this disease not being recognized the way it should be, you are internalizing things and thinking it's you who's somehow trying to get out of work, right? I am a person who by nature is weirdly guilty, so I don't know if it's a woman thing, but so I can totally relate where you'd be I just can't do this anymore. And then we have to think also about the women who work for whom to miss a day of work is missed pay.
Right.
You don't have sick time. You don't have vacation time. And so we were talking about, the impact of that and trying to come up with a solution. And I am embarrassed because I was such a big pusher and I'm so proud of paid leave, and it hadn't clicked. And so it was a doctor on the working group who was like, well, I refer patients for paid leave. And this light bulb of, oh my God, we already passed this. Paid leave could help. And really the intermittent and the reduced schedule based on, what it seems like the majority of folks experiencing endometriosis, where they need maybe that week, a few days a month, you'd be able to take that with paid leave. And the other really big positive is, I thought one of the barriers might be that, again, to get the official diagnosis, as we've talked about, you need the surgery. But with the paid leave program, you don't need that official diagnosis. You need to be working with a healthcare provider, and they have to, determine a constellation of symptoms and determine that there's a treatment in place. But you don't need the surgery, which to me is a game changer.
Right. It is a game changer. But what was your recuperation time, Kaylee, from those surgeries?
So my first two surgeries were done laparoscopically. I had ablation, which is where they just burn off the disease. Typically it grows back. So my recovery was a week, but after 3 to 4 weeks, I started experiencing the symptoms all over again. So it was very quick. My third surgery, I'm very grateful. I was lucky enough to be able to have excision, and my recovery, this was recent. This was in March. I would say I'm still recovering. I had a partial hysterectomy because I also had adenomyosis, And then I had an appendectomy, which is the removal of the appendix. So yeah, I went back to work. It was about a month after that.
So that's where Connecticut paid leave would have come in handy to have that. So you could have taken that whole time off and then still have extra time because it is 12 weeks and you could still have used that for other appointments, that you needed to do and to check in with your doctor. So I do think that paid leave is so important for women who are suffering from this. So what are the next women's health issues heading into this upcoming legislature?
We have a few things that we're looking at. One that links to this, but also impacts additional folks is infertility coverage in the state. So currently coverage it's very antiquated in terms of it really looks at a heterosexual couple. And so we're looking to expand fertility coverage to those in the LGBTQ community and to have Medicaid cover infertility. And additionally, we would expand the disease definition so that folks with endometriosis would be covered. Currently, we address cancer. So, if someone gets a cancer diagnosis and wants to freeze their eggs, they're able to do that. But we want to ensure that for folks experiencing other diseases where that might be necessary, they can do that as well.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And then there's a group of us who are looking at how to address women's pain and how it is often ignored. And so, yes, certainly what we've been talking about today, but we've also heard from folks, who have gotten an IUD implanted and not been offered any medication. Then there are some people who are told, oh, this will be painful, bring someone with you. It just seems across the board when it comes to women's medical issues, the pain piece is just not being addressed.
Interestingly enough, when we're talking about endometriosis, and if you do have to get a partial or a full hysterectomy, then you're talking menopause. Are you looking at anything in that arena?
I'd love to say, yes, we have a bill on the horizon. Fascinatingly, those conversations are just starting. So I do think in the next few years, you'll see legislation to address again, just this the misconceptions, the lack of information when it comes to menopause. But I think, based on the conversation we've had today, it really is tied together that for so long, these things just weren't discussed. And now that we have more women in office, I think we're seeing these issues come to the forefront.
Did you think your bill was going to pass as quickly as it did?
No. I thought there was going to be a lot more education needed. What was so positive / though negative based on what this disease is that once it was brought up, I have so many people coming up to me to tell me that their wife, their mother, they themselves. And so it really is this not spoken about disease. But once we brought it out there, people knew what it was. They know what it is. And they were so happy we were doing something to address it.
Kaylee, any advice for someone listening who may think they have some of the symptoms that you were talking about and maybe talk about some of your symptoms, more of your symptoms?
Oh, sure. So my symptoms, they're mostly GI related, like IBS typical symptoms and pelvic pain. Sciatica is a big one that I experience, bloating, fatigue, abnormal bleeding, pain with intercourse, pain with bowel movements, pain with urination. That was a big one. I was also misdiagnosed with interstitial cystitis at one point. So it affects your whole body. And because the symptoms are so vast, sometimes it's very hard to piece it all together, especially if the person, is misdiagnosed with something or doesn't know. So the first thing I did in my journey that helped me was I started a journal. I started writing everything down, each day of the month, what I felt like, what I was experiencing. And then I brought that to my healthcare provider, and that helped them piece everything together. Another thing, someone can do if they think they have endometriosis is, start talking to people if they're comfortable. I say like one of the biggest pieces, I think, and it does take a while to get there, is just sharing your story. You could start somewhere, somewhat private, like Reddit, like a blog or something. You could talk to people. You could talk to, your close friends, family. And that helped me a lot. I'd also recommend finding support groups. I think almost every state, I don't want to say every state, has a Facebook group that's dedicated to endometriosis. And the support group I started, they're so grateful just to connect and realize what's going on and know they're not alone in what they're experiencing.
And how can people find your support group?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it's on Facebook. It's called Connecticut Endometriosis Support Group. I also have a website. It's www.helloendochick.com. It's a blog I started, but you can find links there. And even if you're not on Facebook, you could just shoot me an email, and we meet weekly on Zoom, and I can add them to the Zoom call.
Representative Jillian Gilchrest, she serves the 18th District in West Hartford. She's a big supporter of Connecticut paid leave. Thank you so much for all you do for Connecticut residents and women. I appreciate you so much. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Kaylee Mitchell, advocate, support group founder, and patient, continued good health to you. I hope that you are on the road to recovery and are feeling better.
Thank you so much.
For more information about endometriosis, you can go to the podcast show notes. For information or to apply for benefits, go to ctpaidleave.org. This has been another edition of the Paid Leave Podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.